Okay, we are now 2 minutes past the hour. I think it's a good time, a good chance for us to get started. So I want to welcome everyone and thank you for joining us. We're here today to talk about the OWASP Top 10 Business Logic Abuse, or the Business Logic Abuse Top 10, if you want to think of it that way. I am joined today by Desiree Michel, who is the Head Information Security Architect for Quantum Mergers. Desiree, welcome. Thank you for joining us. Now you got to hit the mute button.
Thank you. It is great to be here.
There you go. And I am Tim Erlin. I'm the VP of Product for WallArm, and I'm happy to be here as well. So why don't we get started? Just a little bit of agenda so that you know what to expect and what we're going to talk about. I won't read through each of the bullet items up there, but we will cover the OWASP Business Logic Abuse Top 10 and some examples of real world attacks to make the theory real, if you will. But I thought it would be a good idea to start with a little bit of a conversation about really what is a business logic attack? When we talk about business logic abuse or business logic attacks, what do we mean? So Desiree, I mean, why don't we start just from your perspective? What are we talking about here? What's the difference between a business logic attack and another type of attack?
Well, I would say the biggest thing with a business logic attack is that it's manipulating basically how you think and how you processed information. So it's not that someone had to bypass a control or create some malware or spyware to manipulate your machine. They're actually just using what you've created against you.
Hmm. Yeah, so it's not so much a flaw in software or in code. I mean, maybe it is a flaw in software in a big sense, but it's not a flaw in the code that's being exploited. It's an exploit of the way that application or API is architected. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah.
yeah. And I want to emphasize that I don't think when we talk about an incident, it, increasingly incidents consist of multiple attacks. And so business logic abuse, business logic attacks, they're not mutually exclusive from more traditional exploits. These things can occur together as part of a larger incident. So it's not that one precludes the other from being present either.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. It can be a part of, lateral movement. You find many different things, different ways of breaching a system, and it can just be a part of the big picture.
Yeah, I mean, you bring up a great point, which is that we can talk about incidents in terms of the steps that occur. So there's an initial access vector or initial exploit vector, however you want to think about it. Then there are things like lateral movement. There's data exfiltration. These are all can be part of an incident. There are more. I mean, there are taxonomies for describing incidents that
Yes,
we could probably do a separate webinar on.
absolutely. MITRE attack.
Yeah, yeah. MITRE certainly has a role to play there. Of course, yeah. The MITRE attack framework is a great
Yeah.
taxonomy for use there for sure. Yeah, yeah. So that's kind of conceptually what we're talking about. I wanted to put up this slide um, because I think it's a useful explanation, not for specifically what counts as a business logic attack, but for thinking about an individual attack or an individual exploit in a particular way. So the idea here is that you could kind of group these attacks into two big buckets, right? There are stateless attacks, which we're all pretty familiar with. This is um, the example I put up here is SQL injection, but it doesn't matter what the actual exploit is. The point is the attacker sends an exploit, they get the data as a response, or they get the response they're looking for, whether it's data or access. It doesn't require that there's state across a whole session or a whole interaction. It's this attack and sort of stateless. When we talk about stateful attacks, there's an interaction that happens over time. And business logic abuse tends to be a stateful attack, maybe is always a stateful attack because it's exploiting logic in that application. It involves multiple requests or multiple interactions. In this case, we're seeing an ID being incremented until it succeeds, as an example. But I think that this distinction can be helpful to think about in terms of how to categorize attacks or how to talk about them as well. Desiree, does that
Yeah,
make sense to you? Yeah, go
absolutely.
ahead, please.
Yeah, and and then thinking about the stateful attack, these are like sophisticated threat actors. These are people who are probably very familiar with you. They've done their due diligence. They know your process, and they've learned how to mimic you. So they've been committed to this for some time. And so, I mean, in order for this to be successful, they've got to get it right. And so that to me says this is a major threat, because if someone is committing that time and that dedication to figuring out how to infiltrate our system, we should be giving it that same level of consideration.
Hmm. I think you're pointing out an important aspect of business logic abuse to consider, which is that in order to be successful at exploiting the business logic in an application, the attacker has to understand what that business logic, how the business logic works and how it doesn't. Um, and it requires an amount of knowledge or time in order to be successful, as you pointed out. Definitely
Absolutely.
valuable.
Mhm.
That doesn't mean that stateless attacks or traditional attacks aren't important, because if I'm an attacker, I'm likely to start with the easy things, the things that I can easily script and run at scale in an automated fashion. Those remain important types of attacks, but we're definitely seeing more business logic abuse as a growing trend of attacks as well.
Yes.
Cool. So let's shift the conversation a little bit, or continue it forward maybe to just the universe of OWASP top 10 lists. So I I always find it fascinating to go look at OWASP. So OWASP is a great organization, first of all, um, and they've done as a community driven organization a ton of work around helping uh, practitioners categorize, talk about, and generally protect themselves against different types of vulnerabilities and attacks. And one of the ways they do that, not the only way, is with these top 10 lists. This was sort of the origin of OWASP, as originally the Open Web Application Security Project and their top 10 list of web application vulnerabilities. But OWASP has a lot of top 10 lists. Um, there are, as you can see, top 10 lists for cloud native AppSec, for attack surface management, for serverless, for DevSecOps, for drone security, machine learning, et cetera, et cetera. Uh, and I don't know, Desiree, does anything in particular strike you about this sort of universe of OWASP top 10 lists? Anything notable that you find here?
Um, I guess it's notable at the pace at which they're growing.
Yeah, that's true.
I mean, it's like I feel like we started with one, and but as you can see, there are so many, and I don't think people always realize that, that they are very specialized and focused, because as we develop in different ways, we need to assess those different needs, and how we treat those particular environments, because the threats are different, they look different. Tactics may generally be the same or similar, but maybe the techniques have variation. So it's important to know which category you're referencing when you're talking about vulnerability, so that you know that you're applying the proper controls.
Yeah. And also if I would say if you feel like as a practitioner there's something missing from the list of OWASP top 10 lists, you can actually start a project yourself and you can build a new one as well.
Yeah.
So, it's a community driven effort, for sure. And I also noticed that, and when I say notice, I mean I noticed and planned for this webinar that most of these top 10 lists are, um, I can't remember what word you used there, Desiree. They're specialized. I think that was it. They're
Mhm.
technology oriented, right? So data security, drone security, open source, serverless. Some of them are a little less technology oriented, more specialized, like privacy risk, but a lot of technology focused lists. And
Yes.
the reason that's important is because it's part of why the business logic abuse top 10 came into being, was this perceived gap in the universe of OWASP top 10 lists for um, a list that could describe business logic abuse in a way that wasn't specific to a particular technology, that wasn't specific to mobile, for example, or specific to LLMs,
Mhm.
but could talk about business logic abuse at a high level. And I think, Desiree, do you see value in that kind of an articulation?
Oh, definitely. Yes. Being able to apply it at that intricate type of level is exactly what you need to do. And I think that goes to the heart of business logic abuse because that is like what they're attacking, like those specific architectural intricacies of that product or tool. That is what is being attacked. And so
Mhm.
when we assess security problems, we need to be that granular in our assessment in order to resolve those issues. Because again, the threat actors they're spending the time, the money, the commitment to dissect it in that way and think about it. They're reverse engineering it. So that way they can consider it from every possible position. We
Yeah.
should do the same.
Yeah, and this is where we can add a little bit of or I can add a little bit of background on the OWASP, the business logic abuse top 10, because um, the lead contributors there are from Wallarm. Um, they had community help as well, but the intention behind the business logic abuse top 10 was to build um, a top 10 list, sort of grounded in strong theory and grounded in data, and then tested against that data. So, while the list can certainly change as things in the environment change, the intention was to build a list that could capture business logic abuse in a technology agnostic way, so that we
Mhm.
could talk about these kinds of issues across the technologies, and even as new technologies come out, which I think, Desiree, is part of what you were saying there. The value is. So
Absolutely.
let's take a look at the BLA top 10, if you will, specifically in case you didn't go out and research them before this webinar. And, this is the full list of the business logic abuse top 10 as of current 2025, and some short summaries. So not the full detail for each of these and what they consider, but enough to give you an idea of what's behind them, or what their intention is. And I think we could talk about a couple of examples. Desiree, if you have a favorite, I'll pick out a couple of the favorites that I have here, that I think are the most interesting. I like the artifact lifetime exploitation one, which is BLA 5 down at the bottom there, where this is a condition where an attacker is using something that should be short-lived, like a token or a session or a temporary file, um, after it should have expired, because the application doesn't actually validate that it's been expired or doesn't actually retire them. Part of the reason I like this is because it as an example, is it applies today. We can see incidents where people use sessions that should be expired or tokens that should be expired, as an exploit. But I also remember back in history at some point, exploits, earlier exploits that used temporary files as an example, that were stored and should have been removed but weren't removed from a temp directory. So it's
Right.
it's it's an example that sort of explains or exemplifies the lifespan that kind of business logic abuse can have. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And that also reminds me of the action limit overrun because now this is something I feel like has just been getting exploited since the beginning of time. And it just seems like it just isn't getting the right attention maybe, and it's funny because it's number one, but it's an oldie but a goodie. It's these type of coupons. They're easily manipulated. The timing isn't set properly. The functions aren't working, and they just keep coming back to get us. And I'm not really sure what to do to get through just this point of testing because I would think that that is something that with proper planning and testing we could easily fix. But here it is, still number one.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's true. And there is also an element uh, of timing in there as well. How are these tasks rate limited? How many of them can you run in sequence very quickly? That kind of thing as well. Yeah, that's
Yes.
interesting. I see a comment on LinkedIn about I think it's actually to the universe of OWASP top 10 lists that I don't see access controls listed there. There is not a separate top 10 list for access control issues, although I would say if you think that there should be, you could start one. In terms of the business logic abuse, there is the number 9 there, BLA number 9, for broken access control, which broadly applies to any kind of situation where the application doesn't properly check permissions, doesn't authenticate correctly, and ultimately allows people to do things that they're not supposed to do as
Mhm.
well. I definitely have. There's another one that's a favorite of mine as well, which is the missing transition validation, and shortly followed by concurrent workflow order bypass, which is the only one that has a 4-letter acronym. But the missing transition validation, the reason I like that one, or I'm interested in it, is it's because it's specifically about exploiting the sequence of transitions that need to occur in an application and an application's failure to validate that those transitions have occurred. So it
Mhm.
allows an attacker, or the attacker takes the opportunity to skip steps in the process. And it's interesting because it's one of the things that is difficult um, to detect and difficult to block, in applications and APIs, because it's very business logic oriented. It's so tightly coupled to the logic of the application itself.
Right.
You could,
Yeah.
yeah, you could compare it to like the internal state disclosure, which is about giving up information you shouldn't.
Mhm.
That's relatively easy to identify, I suppose.
Yeah. And I think, with business logic, they're all pretty close together because it all kind of comes down to something was misconfigured. Like there's some part of the business context that isn't doing what it should do. And so it's just and while that's not a specific, top 10 in business logic, but um again, I think with, the right architectural planning from the beginning, the design, the development, starting way early, and then of course performing those repetitive tests and having the internal teams testing it as users, having those external teams testing it, we can definitely defeat a lot of these types of compromises from happening just by rethinking our process and looking at it through different lenses as we go through the process.
Yeah, I mean, I think given your experience, it's it's a challenging thing to get teams to shift to. Or maybe I should ask that as a question: is it a challenging thing to get teams to that shift challenging to get teams to move to?
I'd say yes. In life in general, everyone wants to move fast, and it's not always the priority. And things cost money. Those obviously having people commit to that level of effort is expensive for companies. It's not necessarily producing dividends in the moment. And getting people on board, I personally feel like it's a challenge. So
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, interesting. So there's a question I see in Zoom actually. Is business logic 5, which is the artifact lifetime exploitation, is that akin to session stealing? Which is a good question. Um, so that particular business logic vulnerability is not specifically session stealing, although they're related. It's about using an artifact that should have been expired or should have been short-lived and has not been expired properly. Stealing a valid session wouldn't necessarily fall into that category because it's not something that should have been expired. The only argument you could make there, I guess, is that uh, the session should have been short-lived enough to not be available to be stolen successfully. So I suppose it depends on the length of time between the token being issued or the session identifier being issued and the theft of that. I don't know if there was anything you wanted to add to that, Desiree. Feel free.
I was just going to say, yeah, so effectively someone manipulated the timing of that session. I mean, not necessarily they manipulated, but they took advantage of it in such a way that particular
Yeah,
session timing. So, I guess one could look at it either way. It's not a real steal. They just, again, found a flaw and said, I'm going to abuse that flaw. So,
yeah, yeah. Of course, the ability to steal the session or to steal that token may fall into the broken access control problem label
Mhm.
there as well.
Yes.
If you're not protecting those sessions properly, that would fall in there. Cool. So that's the full list of the OWASP business logic abuse top 10. I would totally, if you're interested in these things, and of course you are because you joined this webinar, you should definitely go to the OWASP page for the business logic abuse top 10 and actually look at them, read through them. Each of them has examples that you can and longer explanations, and start thinking about using these, sort of in your day-to-day conversations about attacks and vulnerabilities, and think about how they fit into the or don't into the BLA top 10. I thought it would be worthwhile for this session for us to spend a little bit of time on some examples, real world examples that are out there, because theory is one thing, and the real world is another. So we picked out 4 examples, if I remember correctly, and sort of mapped them to the BLA top 10, and we can talk about them a little bit. Desiree, I don't know. Did you look into this Stripe issue at all? Did you want to talk about it a little bit, or do you want me to?
Oh, sure. I can talk about it.
Yeah.
We'll both talk about it, but I can start us off.
Cool. Great.
Okay, so the Stripe issue basically came down to exploiting a flaw in the application's design, which is what business logic vulnerabilities are. And so ultimately, they were able to manipulate payment flows to trick the system into releasing funds, services, all without valid transactions. So this was compromising specifically the race conditions. Users could attempt to pay, but because this is, you're paying for a product with crypto, um, but immediately it would send like multiple cancellation requests. And so the system's logic for processing the payment and canceling the order had a timing flaw, and that was abused. And so in this type of a situation, we look at possible, what are our mitigations? Where did we fall short here? Where are how did we protect our critical flows in this particular situation? Our access control, our timing control.
Hmm. One of the things I like about this example is that it's messy, because in the real world, often incidents are not simple. These incidents don't occur to be examples for us. And so there are multiple things happening here, some of which, are applicable to the conversation, and some of which are less applicable. So the the starting point here is a web skimming campaign, installing essentially a fake checkout form into these various commerce platforms. Um, that's a flaw in software. That's malware. Doesn't necessarily fit into the business logic abuse. But then where we get the shadow function abuse here that we're talking about, um, is that the attackers wanted to make sure that they were pulling valid card data. And so they used a deprecated Stripe API to validate the stolen card data so that they could avoid some of those timing issues, and they could avoid getting cards canceled or locked out, and they could pull out valid card data. And that's a good example of a shadow function that's being
Mhm.
abused, a deprecated API, as part of a larger exploit, or a larger attack, if you will. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, and that poor business logic, as you mentioned, this they were able to use it and to withdraw funds using multiple sessions. So they were able to bypass those withdrawal limits. And so you
Hmm.
see again the importance of understanding the flow and how the logic should respond, because these little misconfigurations can be easily manipulated,
Yeah.
and they become very expensive.
Yeah. Very true. Very true. All right. Let's look at the next example. This is one that's very recent, actually, as of August, which is just last month. So the high level here is that there was a company called SalesLoft that had a chatbot, an AI chatbot called SalesLoft Drift, that integrated with Salesforce, with a CRM tool. And that integration, the authentication was handled with OAuth tokens. those tokens or some of those tokens were stolen in a manner that has not yet been disclosed, as far as I could find. And then the attacker used those tokens to authenticate and steal data, impacting a whole bunch of customers. There's a long list of the impacted customers, and they got information that, sensitive information from Salesforce instances, AWS access keys, Snowflake tokens, passwords, lots of personal information. And they also, sort of were able to delete logs to cover their tracks. So it's an interesting one. Desiree, did you have any thoughts on this particular one?
Just the typical reminders, rotate your keys. It's important that we rotate our credentials and our tokens. We need to re-authenticate. It's part of our access control. And it's like, if someone already asked about it, because as many of us in security know, it's typically your number one gap. It's the place where they're getting in, they're getting access, period. And so we have to be aware of how that's being done and the things we've put in place to protect us if we aren't actually using those things properly, making sure that re-authentication is happening, making sure that there is a rotation process that is being used effectively, reviewing our logs, things like that. I mean, these are like the basics of our security system. If we're not making sure our security is doing its job for us, then we're not secure. And access
Yeah.
control is a huge gap to fail on.
And there's a challenging angle to this one in particular, because if I think about it, let's say that I'm a victim here. Um, the entire exploit occurs without me having any access to monitor or view that. So you've got a third party tool, SalesLoft Drift, that is connecting to a Salesforce instance, so another third party SaaS that I'm a customer of. I have no ability to monitor that connection or that traffic. I can't get in between those two tools. And
Mhm.
so what are my options for limiting that risk? Because there are lots of situations like that where you've got now have multiple SaaS tools that are integrated with each other that have access to your sensitive data. Um, what can organizations do to limit that risk?
Yeah, and basically the things that I mentioned are things that companies can do because even though they are connected, integrated using this third-party tool, they still have the ability to control their own keys and their own authentication
Mhm.
to that tool. So if those things are changing, the threat actor, whoever is using that integration, if it's not automatically updated, they won't have access to that information.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. Um, we didn't mention, a tool that maybe people think is not especially effective, but is still important, is making sure that your vendors adhere to, some standard of security, right? Because in that exchange, both SalesLoft and Salesforce should be able to monitor that connection. Um,
Mhm.
you may
No
not be
doubt.
able to audit that, but you can try.
Hmm.
Yeah. So we put this one under the artifact lifetime exploitation, where these tokens should have been short-lived, as Desiree was saying, and they weren't, and they were stolen and used. So it actually fits in with that session stealing conversation as well. And where would you put that example? Yeah. So another example to bring up is this issue with Ticketmaster, which I marked as ongoing because there isn't a specific date that this occurred. It's more an ongoing issue that has resulted in the Federal Trade Commission suing a ticket reseller, Key Investment Group, specifically for evading purchasing limits. And this actually goes back to the Taylor Swift Eras tour and the strong. I mean, there were some issues with tickets in general there, but this mechanism to resell those tickets at a high, much higher markup as well. So, Desiree, do you want to talk a little bit about what the business logic abuse here was, in case it's not obvious?
Sure. Yeah. Yeah, it's like you said, it is an ongoing issue, and there are many moving parts. And there were a lot of things being attacked and compromised, I'd say, given this type of a scenario. So ultimately, we had like there were bots involved that were able to create accounts very quickly. And using these bots, they were able to make these purchases. So the security logic that they were basically bypassing is they were able to reverse engineer the barcoding system. And so through that, they could authenticate tokens, they could rotate barcodes, all by bypassing as well Ticketmaster security. So Ticketmaster, it seems, wasn't even aware, which is also scary, that it's going on. So they're doing all this inside without you being aware, because they found a way around your barcoding system. And then with as far as like the resellers, it's been, a problem because you're allowing an excessive number of accounts to have this purchasing power and the reselling process, as you said. So what do they do?
Yeah. And I marked this as a resource quota violation, but I think there are probably other business logic categories that might apply here, given the sort of the multi-step and multi-pronged process that they went through to
Yeah.
acquire the tickets. Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I even think of, also like rate limiting, because why should you be able, to have so much time, like why aren't these barcodes expiring faster, and how could someone manipulate it to that level? I mean, it's extreme.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. And I know nobody wants to think of Ticketmaster as a victim, generally speaking, but they in this case they seem to be. Um, so yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's one more example that I wanted to bring up, which I hadn't originally planned to bring up, but it appeared in the last couple of days, and it was super interesting, and there was a lot of detail, so it was worth sharing. So whether you know it or not, these brands, Tim Hortons, Burger King, Popeyes, Firehouse, they're all managed by this Restaurant Brands International. And there was a team of security researchers who basically uncovered a long list of issues with RBI related to their drive-through operations specifically. And so I pulled out the list of issues as I saw them, and I tried to map them to the BLA categories. But it it started with a sign up endpoint that didn't validate that the person signing up was authorized to use the system at all. That was an employee of RBI or any of the franchises. That was the first step, and then the attackers actually found, after they managed to go through that anyone can register step, they also found that there was a GraphQL sign up, another endpoint that they could just bypass all of the sign up process using GraphQL. So there was a, a a GraphQL endpoint that was open for introspection. So if you're not familiar with GraphQL, it's like querying a database. It's an API that looks like a database, is a way to think about it. And there's one query you can send that basically says, give me the schema. Generally speaking, for a production deployed application, you should disable that because you don't need to share that schema with everybody. If it's not disabled, it gives the attacker essentially a map of every query that they could run. And that's very useful for an attacker. So that was available as a step. That got them to this sign up bypass. And then from there, they had access to all kinds of interesting information. There was a password reset function that was emailing plain text passwords. There was a whole global store directory that was exposed. There was this unauthenticated create token mutation in GraphQL as well that basically let them create tokens to give them access to lots of other things without any authorization process, and ultimately let them get access to actual recordings of the drive-through audio, which, if you're interested, they also feed off to AI for various analysis. So there was some discussion of that too, which I didn't count as a particular issue, but was interesting. So this sequence of issues that are all can be categorized in that as different business logic categories: missing transition validation, object state manipulations, a whole bunch of internal state disclosure, broken access control. And while it feels like to me at least, I hesitate because it feels a bit like piling on here. But these are like getting this level of detail is incredibly important for us as practitioners to learn about what the reality might be if you don't put in place the protections or the architecture to protect against these business logic abuse um, uh, vulnerabilities and issues. So that was a lot of me talking there. Desiree, I don't know if you dug into this one, if you had thoughts about it that I didn't cover.
Well, yeah, I thought, I mean, I think you really said it all there. It's a pretty simple case. I mean, obviously, we're still kind of in the throes of it, but everything you said, everything they compromised were pretty everyday things. The you should have changed, like, that authentication bypass, the plain text passwords. I mean, the fact that that's still in use, those types of things. So yeah, a little bit of oversight, and this would have never happened.
Well, and there's a point there that you didn't make, but you're reminding me of, which is that when we talk about business logic abuse, we tend to err on the side or the idea that it's somehow complicated or sophisticated, but it doesn't have to be. If the application is architected in a way that makes abuse easy, it's easy. So when someone says, a sophisticated business logic abuse attack or a sophisticated business logic attack, yeah, maybe it can be sophisticated, but sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's an open sign up process that doesn't validate who should be able to sign up.
Right. Yeah. Like, yeah, these were all just basic security flaws,
Yeah.
really.
In fact, it reminds me of an incident that I didn't include because it's a bit older, which was one that happened last year with Dell, where they had a partner portal that allowed anyone to sign up. So they never validated whether you were an actual partner. And once you signed up, you had access to all of the other partners' information, directory.
Right.
There was some data scraping involved, but another example of missing missing transition validation there.
Yes.
Yeah, interesting. Cool. Well, so I mean, those are some examples. It's always useful I always tend to think of these things in terms of, theory or, sort of the research, and then what are the real world examples that kind of make it real for people. And there are definitely examples out there to make it real. But that brings us to, the question of what should you do about it? Because, we don't want to talk about all the problems without talking about some of the potential solutions. Um, and I'll say that I think, these are not easy problems to solve, um, but they are problems that you can do something about. So while Desiree and I talk about what you can do, if you have questions for us or comments, feel free to add them in the Q&A or add them in the LinkedIn chat, so that we can answer them, as we go. So Desiree, do you want to talk a little bit, given your role and your background, a little bit about what steps people can take in that development stage, when you're building your applications to protect against business logic abuse?
Yes, absolutely. I love building. I'm an architect at heart. And so for me, this is the most important part, where you start just kind of whiteboarding, understanding your actual logic of your product. This is where you have your design teams and your project teams and your developers, and everyone's just trying to figure out what's best. But oftentimes in real life, I feel like this step is not necessarily skipped, but it's skimmed through very quickly. It's not given the attention that it deserves because you've really got to map through your business processes. I'd say that is one of the most important thing, having that level of detail, because these are critical workflows, and you want to make sure that you are looking at it in a very detailed manner. You want to be able to diagram your data flows as well. That's where, like, your project managers and architects come in, being able to create those visuals for you so you can actually see the flow, not just talk about the flow. And then, a lot of times you're able to identify some of these issues early on. So you don't even design or develop them into your product. You're already aware of them. And then, of course, you can look outside of what's normal. I mean, I always like looking at threat actors. Being able to implement some form of adversary emulation in your process, some threat hunting, some offensive informed defense. So ultimately, you're going to be testing, but that has to happen constantly. Like I like to test at every phase to do some part of testing to make sure we're refining as we go. And then, of course, there's automated testing as well. And so these are all parts of the process. And so you have to have a very agile flow going. And I mean, I think the most important part of that process is having a team that is committed to it. And of course, having leadership committed to it. It goes back to that trying to do things fast, like, get it
Mhm.
to market quick, as opposed to get it done well and get it to market. It's just a different mentality. But I think, in my experience with those steps in place, you end up creating something much more secure with less of these types of issues because you can think these through and test these. And not that you get everything every time. No, of course, we all have errors, but you can make leaps and bounds.
So you started with talking about the need to map the business flows. Was that the language you used? I can't.
Yes, you're mapping
Yeah.
yeah, yes,
And so does that mean that the developers need to understand the business flow of the applications they're building?
I say yes. I do.
Is that a challenging is that a perspective that you see challenged?
Yes, I do. And it's again, it goes to time. It goes to where is the best use of their time. I find all the time developers aren't interested in this part of the process, and it's
Yeah.
not necessarily something the organization is requiring of them. And so it's not easy to get everyone on board.
It's interesting to me because we were talking earlier about how in order for an attacker to exploit business logic, they have to understand the business logic of the application itself. And so what we're talking about now, as we sort of put these two ends of the conversation together, is that you have attackers who holistically understand the application better than the developers, the individual developers who built it, and as a consequence, they're able to take advantage of the gaps.
And
Any
that's
individual
exactly it.
developer might build their piece effectively. It does the job it needs to do,
Hmm.
but they're missing the connection between, or the lack of connection between the pieces. So
Yes.
I can't help but think about how um, development teams would benefit or can benefit from someone with that attacker mindset being a part of the process. Um, but I don't know how to do that without, as you said, without having that person constantly be slowing things down or perceived as constantly slowing things down.
And that, I mean, yeah, it's the constant issue because again, these are not profit makers. I mean, the way organizations look at it, I see it differently, and it's kind of been my mantra in the industry. But I'm all about this. Like, I'd rather, what is it, measure twice, cut once. The whole sharpening the axe theory. Like, those speak to me. I believe in that. It's like, and I believe in it because again, I'm looking at the threat actors, and when you assess these incidents and these cases after they've happened, and you look at the time, you look at the effort. I mean, they will spend months, years on one topic to master it, to know more about you and your product than you know about yourself. So if they're that committed to bringing us harm, why aren't we showing more or a higher level of commitment to helping reinforce just even these basic practices? Because these are things we could figure out on our own. And I believe that wholeheartedly. When you commit the time and effort to it, you can figure most of this out because a
Yeah.
lot of this is not extremely difficult. A lot of it does not require a ton of effort. It's just finding a mistake, and obviously they have the benefit on their side. They only need to find one error, whereas we have to prevent a lot of errors, but they only need one.
Yeah.
But with a little bit of extra effort on our end in this beginning of the process, again, starting from that design development, those critical workflows, we can build stronger and build better
Yeah.
from my
And
perspective.
you mentioned leadership at some point in there. I think it's important to acknowledge that tone from the top makes a big difference because as a developer, I'm not going to get credit for not shipping business logic vulnerabilities or any other kind of vulnerability. I'm going to get credit for shipping on time.
That's
And
it. Yeah.
it's very hard to create an incentive structure that motivates or incentivizes developers based on things they avoided shipping. Um, but it's important, right?
Correct.
A-
Absolutely.
And they'll, as you said, they'll never be perfect. So we talked about development. We have to also talk about mitigation, right? So, um, you've got tools in place, most likely tools in place to monitor your applications, whether it's API traffic or application traffic or some other type of monitoring, endpoint monitoring. You want to make sure that those tools can actually detect business logic abuse, that they're built to do that, and that they can actually block it, because detection is not enough. Detection isn't mitigation; it's information, and
Right.
that's an important aspect as well.
Hmm.
And then you
Yeah.
mentioned testing. Um, Testing key component, both in production, pre-production, and testing in production, because you might not catch everything
Hmm.
pre-production.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah, and and there's all kinds of testing. And then even with our testing, you need to constantly tune it. It's not like a one and done or
Hmm.
let's leave it the same and just keep testing the same, because you're going to kind of keep getting the same results and you think you're improving, but maybe you're not. So that's why I again like to look at the threat actors. I like to assess things from their perspective. I want to bring that into the room because it's not, again, the room, in my perspective, should be filled with different parties, different perspectives. And each one of us in the room has something to add, and we
Yeah,
have something that the other may not see. And that's the benefit of building that way and testing that way. So it's not, again, testing isn't just a one-way thing. So you need to have the consideration for the threat in this process and how they would manipulate it, how they would attack your workflows. And that should be added into that testing, I'll say fine tuning, so that you're constantly changing the way that you're testing as well.
yeah,
And so of course you have like your automated like fuzzing tools that you'll definitely want to use as well. You want to integrate into your CI/CD pipelines. You're looking at behavioral patterns, signatures, scanning, all those things you're going to want to do. But again, what's very important to me is that repetitive process of testing and creating your testing with different variations. So you are getting those perspectives and making those changes regularly throughout your process of continuous testing.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, that's great. That's a great conclusion, I think. We've got a few questions. I think we should take a look at the questions. While we do that, I'm just going to put up this page. We have a white paper from Wallarm about how we can protect from the OWASP top 10 for business logic abuse. So if you're interested in reading those details, feel free to hit that white paper. While that's up, let's talk about some of the questions here. Um, One question is, I have a question regarding enabling monitoring with Salesforce. Since it's SaaS-based offering, don't solutions like CASB really help organizations to mitigate these attacks? Interesting question. Desiree, did you have an opinion there? I'm happy to jump in.
Um, I mean, I would say, here's my position on that. I would not rely on any other product or party to answer or defend for me, not 100%. Yes, we have these tools in place, and yes, they should do and provide a certain job for us, but that does not relieve us fully of being proactive and aware, I'd say,
Mm,
of what's going on around us.
yeah,
And so I try not to ever put, say, all my eggs in one basket.
yeah. I think the person asking this question has, in many ways, the right idea that because CASB is a tool that I would purchase that monitors that third-party SaaS. Uh, it makes perfect sense. The challenge is that CASB, by just based on the architecture of what it's doing, is focused primarily on configuration. So it can help you configure or ensure that Salesforce is configured securely, but it can't monitor that traffic because Salesforce doesn't expose that traffic. SalesLoft doesn't expose that traffic between two, third parties that you don't have control over. So it's a challenging spot to
Right.
manage.
Yeah, there's always those limitations and gaps, and that's like what we should consider with our tools. Like none of
True.
them are 100%.
True. Yeah, and understanding those gaps and doing the threat modeling to understand whether or not they're meaningful exposures for you is all part of making that risk mitigation choice, because it is a choice, right?
Mm.
We have another question here. Do you see malicious requests used to bypass rate limiting? Not sure which item that might fit under in the list. Well, actually, I'll just go back to the list for a second to look. So the question is about malicious requests bypassing rate limiting. I think it depends on what that function to bypass the rate limiting is. If it's because it could be using a deprecated API as with Stripe so that you're not impacted by rate limiting, that would fall into the shadow function abuse. It could be bypassing some authentication. Like if the rate limiting is in place, um, bypassing it is going to, it might fall into, bypassing it could happen multiple ways is my point to finish that sentence. But it could be like missing transition validation that, you're not, uh, um, or an object state manipulation. So I think it depends entirely on exactly what the function is for bypassing that rate limiting. That was my conclusion. All right, let's see. Do we have any additional questions? I don't see further questions. If you have them, feel free to pop them in there, but I'm looking for more. I think that's it for the questions. So as I said, there's a white paper. There's a couple comments in the chat. Let's see. There's one nice comment for you, Desiree, that you're speaking the truth. It's very hard to make the case that business logic abuse matters to some participants. So that's good. And how do you catch rate limiting through bouncing IP addresses? That's a great question, actually. So this is going to depend on the specific application that you're talking about, but I'm going to assume you're asking about APIs because that's where, or web applications, but that's where WallArm's expertise lies in particular. So the key there is about what can you track. So if that application establishes sessions, then what you want to do is track the rate limiting through session-based metrics or session-based blocking. So they may change IP addresses within a session, but you're tracking the session. If there's no session involved, that's a different scenario. So now you're just rotating IPs against an API. At that point, you're going to be challenged to enforce rate limiting, but you would see potentially that behavior as malicious because of the rotating IP addresses. So IP rotation or even session rotation might would flag that as abusive behavior, not because it's bypassing rate limiting or avoiding rate limiting, but because it's abusive in terms of using that technique as well. And generally speaking, if someone is rotating IPs like that, they're going to be doing something else behaviorally that looks suspicious as well. So you're probably matching on multiple things to detect that. All right, cool. I think that's it for the questions. We do always like to end with the next webinar that's coming up as well. So we're planning another webinar, which will be around a CISO's guide to API security in October. Feel free to join us for that. Otherwise, Desiree, I want to thank you for spending the time. It was a good conversation. I appreciated it. I think everybody else appreciated it as well. So thank you for joining us.
Absolutely. It was great to be here. Thank you so much.
And thanks everyone else for joining us too.